Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I'm your host, Joe Kuzma, and my sidekick today, as per the usual, hanging out, flanking me to the side. I just got done watching Top Gun, so I guess you're Goose to my Maverick. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah, okay.
We should all have, like, code names, you know that, but you're Mr. Black and Gold till you're dead and cold. It's Brian Roach, and we're here for, I don't know what I want to call this. I almost want to say this is one of my pet peeves, but I don't know if it gets under my skin enough. I've been talking about how various, players are set to hit free agency, but there's rumors of people being released, and all of a sudden, every time one of these guys gets dropped or is going to be dropped by their current team, they're immediately a perfect fit that'll come in for a veteran minimum with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I am talking about today how it gets under my skin, it irritates me, it grinds my gears about this whole Steelers need a number 2 wide receiver situation, Brian. And there's a number of guys. Let's just throw it out there right now. This is getting on my nerves, and then I'm going to talk about how the Steelers actually had the best laid plans. But Brandon Marshall asked for his release from the New York Jets just over the last, day or so. Now all of a sudden, he has ties to the city of Pittsburgh and being local or whatever. All of a sudden now, just like I had ranted about Darrelle Revis, Brandon Marshall is the perfect fit for this team. Now, I don't necessarily hate this idea all the way, but there's quite a bit of it that I do dislike. What are your initial thoughts?
I'm going to fall on the side of I don't hate it. It would have to be perfect to make it work. Meaning, it's unrealistic to expect a guy like Brandon Marshall to take a league minimum contract. But if they could have gotten him for, say, a James Harrison contract, I would be okay with it for the simple fact that we still have question marks at the receiver position that we don't know what the answers are yet. We might have everything we need, but we might not. But it's probably unrealistic. And if you're Brandon Marshall and the whole point of being released is you want to win a Super Bowl, I think you have a very limited group of teams you're willing to talk to, but the number 1 team on that list, sad to say, probably is up near Boston.
Oh, man. You know what? And this has become a recurring theme over the last several Steel City. This is almost going to become like the Foxborough Underground podcast because I keep talking about the Patriots so much, but you're absolutely right. When you're making it to all these AFC title games in a row and you're appearing in the Super Bowl, this might be the one of these other one-year things where Brandon Marshall shows up and it becomes like I don't know. You know what? This hasn't worked for them either at times. Like Randy Moss did work, but Danny Amendola has been a flame out for the most part up there. He was a darling in the one postseason, but for the regular season, he's always hurt. That was always his knock when he was with the Rams. Chad Ochocinco was not any good. He was supposed to come in there and be Randy Moss number 2 for Tom Brady, and it didn't work for him there. So Marshall could. Maybe he is looking at that. I don't know for sure. There's also a number of other suitors that are probably willing to spend the money. Some people feel that he could be maybe a locker room headache or anything. I think those days are kind of beyond him. You really haven't heard anything about that. I think the Miami Dolphins were enough of a dumpster fire and had been for many years. It's kind of like with the Cleveland Browns. If you hear something coming out of that locker room, rumored or otherwise factual, you could lend credence to it to maybe bypass that because you probably wouldn't have that same situation in Pittsburgh because the guy would be happy there. Those teams were just miserable teams. So that doesn't bother me necessarily so much as the guy is 32 going on 33 this month. And this is coming courtesy of, I I wanted to say it was Dale Lawley, Observer reporter, and he was saying that there's just 54 receivers in the history of the NFL who produced a 1,000-yard season at age 33, and then that number drops to 37 at age 34 and 17 at age 35. So for everyone that was complaining about giving a huge mega deal to Antonio Brown, who is going to be, he's 29 or going to be 29, he has several more years before that drop off. In fact, the life of the contract, which Eric just put out an article on Steel City Underground about. He's going to own every franchise record if everything projects the way it is. He didn't really – we're going to talk about that decline. I put the quotations up in the air with my fingers. His decline more or less attributed to double teams and not having another guy to throw the ball to last year. Still 100 and some catches, over 1,000 yards, double-digit touchdowns. That's not a decline. Those are still Pro Bowl numbers. He was in the Pro Bowl. But Marshall, on the other hand, is several years older and has already been on the decline. If you want to say it's because of bad quarterback play and bad teams, go ahead, but I think it's a risk.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It is a risk, and the bottom line again is we may already have all our answers. We just don't know yet. It would be great if the NFL didn't slow play Martavis being reinstated or not being reinstated, because that would give us an answer. If they're not going to do it, then we'd know, okay, we've got a weakness there. If they are, then we know at least we have the potential for having a guy there. There's always a risk with somebody who's been suspended twice for the same thing. So it's a possibility, but if they want to add some receiver depth and maybe give Brady some new weapons to try and eke out yet another run next year, it certainly makes more sense for them to try and get somebody like, Marshall than it does, say, Alshon Jeffries, who may be gone from the Bears, because they may not be able to afford him. They don't have the cap space. So we have to see. And they, they're great at finding those small, light-skinned receivers.
You mean white guys? I think I could say. I think I could say
guys.
that. I could say that safely.
As a white guy, I can say the Patriots like to draft quick little white guys.
Oh man, wasn't that like what we were talking about with like Christian McCaffrey just ripping up all the numbers at the combine? I mean, he had a faster cone time than Odell Beckham Jr. did, and he's working out as a running back and a receiver, and I think they've honed in on that. He's a fit for the Patriots. I think a lot of people just think Danny Woodhead, to be completely honest. I see Wes Welker in him if he were to play like a wide receiver. The guy's abundantly talented, freakish athlete. I mean, it's kind of like
I want him nowhere near New England.
Yeah,
nowhere.
Exactly. But you know what? In the same aspect, wouldn't Bill Belichick be the kind of guy that would take like a Jabril Peppers and find the position he might be good at? Because that guy's like a freak of an athlete as well. I know we don't like talking about that because of that team up north, but for those, I got to explain this for those listening. While we are hardcore, passionate, diehard Pittsburgh Steelers fans, myself, maybe not as much as Brian, but he bleeds Buckeye. He is a scarlet and gray Ohio State guy. I know we got a whole variety of the spectrum here as far as Pittsburgh Steelers fans following like West Virginia and Penn State and Pitt and everything else. So we hope not to offend anyone by saying so. But I think even in mentioning Mountaineers fans, Nittany Lions fans, Panthers fans, etc., I think we're all in the same boat, and we hate the Michigan Wolverines, or at least strongly dislike them as much as the New England Patriots, especially now that they have Jim Harbaugh as a head coach. Just a little footnote there as to why we're saying what we're saying, because as we get into the draft talk and going forward, me and Brian will be talking about some of these players, and we're going to have a hard time saying that M word on the air.
I can't say it. I think I came up with a new term, which is Badgers on steroids.
Oh, just a mutant animal. So,
Yes.
but you know what? In all this talk and all this seriousness, the Steelers have a abundance of wide receivers, especially since they decided they were bringing back Kobe Hamilton. So, if I want to use fingers and toes to count for some of our other fans,
Yeah.
that might cross a line. I try not to cross that line here, but you have Antonio Brown, number 1 overall. Okay, obviously. Let's just kick over to, we'll say Sammy Coates, Darius Hayward-Bay, that's 3. Then you have your actual number 3 is the 4th on this list, Eli Rogers. Kobe Hamilton is number 5 on this list, DeMarcus Ayers. So you now have 6 wide receivers where a team usually carries maybe 5 at most, and the Steelers carried more last year. Of course, Ayers and Hamilton were both on the practice squad to start the season because they had Marcus Wheaton. And the guy that's on this commissioner's exemption, whatever list that's still suspended and could come back is Martavis Bryant. Now, we haven't heard a whole lot on Marcus Wheaton, whether or not he could return. Jim Wexell's reporting that the Steelers have some interest if the price is right. I mean, I don't know. He had a bad year. He was snake bitten in a contract year. There might be teams that might give him a look. There might not. He's already familiar with this offense, and he was already kind of the number 2 and number 3 guy out there that could. I mean, let's put it this way. Do we feel that Marcus Wheaton is better than Darius Hayward-Bay? Yes, absolutely. Do you feel that he's better than Sammy Coates?
Depending on the condition of Sammy Coates' hands, maybe.
Maybe. Okay, there's a push there. I agree with you as well. We don't know enough about DeMarcus Ayers. I'm not going to say yay or nay there. I think that's fair. Is he better than Kobe Hamilton?
Yes.
Yes. So would you bring back Marcus Wheaton then? I think the yays have it if it were possible there. And I don't think you're really losing anything if you end up cutting someone like a Kobe Hamilton. And we had also said, and this actually happened, Eric had put out a piece on 4 potential cap casualties, and we have to pay all these guys like Bell and Brown. So Ryan Harris retires. Some people reporting $2 million. Effectively, I think Simon Chester put out $1.3 million was the actual effective savings or whatever. Darius Hayward-Bay is another one of those guys that could fall under the axe too if they felt that Marcus Wheaton was somebody they could bring back. I think DHB gives so much more on special teams. He might survive. But I think Kobe would probably be the cap casual or the casualty, so to speak. But I understand the cap issue with DHB, but it's still a pretty small number. Yeah. So just counting on fingers and toes again, you got Brown, you got Coates, you got DHB, you've got Rogers, you got Hamilton, you got Ayers. Wheaton would be 7. And then we still don't know up in the air. We hear something different every single day. Martavis Bryant, who looks like he is he might be doing the James Harrison routine for his workouts. He looks like a monster right now.
He looks so good. We have Zach over at SCU that he's a wide receiver dork. Okay. That's his thing. Wide receivers are his thing. And you just know he is drooling over Martavis coming back. And I understand why. He looks like he is in amazing shape. He looks like he is focused again. Like he knows this is my last grasp at this and I'm making it count. And that's what we all have to hope happens. We hope he's figured this out. We hope he's got all his troubles behind him. I'm sure that there's not a Steelers fan out there that doesn't want that to be true, because when you put him on the field with AB, it's a different offense.
Oh, it absolutely is. I'd even make that argument maybe even with Wheaton, because we've seen Wheaton have some flashes as well. He's absolutely made the catches that Sammy has not, for one reason or another, with Sammy. And you know what? Let's talk about Sammy for a second, because this is really what I want to boil down to. This is what grinds my gears, Bri. Antonio Brown has 106 receptions last season, during the regular season. 15 games, didn't play the final one. That has to be accounted for as part of his, quote, decline. 1,284 yards, 12 touchdowns. Now you go to the very next guy on that list, and I've been saying for the longest time the second best receiver had been Le'Veon Bell. offline, me and you had that conversation of, sorry, Bell can't just be the second best receiver. But we saw what happened when Bell comes off the field in the AFC Championship game, not only from a running standpoint, but the passing game standpoint. Outside of that, is there a number two? I mean, we had Eli Rogers started 8 games. He played in 13 of them. He was in a walking boot for a little while. He caught 48 balls, almost had 600 yards, 3 TDs. One of those, he had like 2 insane catches. One was at the season opener up in Washington. It was a ping pong ball that was actually intended for Sammy Coates, speaking of the devil, and bounces to him. Then there was another one against the Bengals where he dives out and catches it and gets right over the goal line. He moves the chains. I like him. He's going to be even better now with a year of experience under his belt. So you don't necessarily not have a number 2 guy, but he is a slot receiver. So he does come off the field. We did see him play on the outside a little bit. Could be more. They might expand his role. We don't know that. And Ayers looks to be kind of the same prototype and may not get on the field for that very reason. Kind of like Antonio Brown was behind Emmanuel Sanders on the depth chart for a little while. And if it wasn't for Sanders screwing up his foot and whatnot, I don't know if we would have ever found out the type of player that AB is.
I agree with that. And one of the points that I've made continually over the season is DeMarcus Ayers is Eli Rogers, but Eli Rogers is more known. And, I mean, they're the same guy. For the most part, they are slot type guys, and even though DeMarcus Ayers contributed at the end of the year in a non-slot position at times, he's much more of a slot guy than he is a number 2. And you know, the real question would be if we get both Wheaton and Martavis, who is the true number 2? My gut says it's Martavis, but Wheaton can certainly challenge for that. If it's the Wheaton of 2 years ago versus the Wheaton of last year, it's up in the air, but that's one of those things that's a good problem to have. And if we knew all those things were true, I still think the Steelers will draft a wide receiver in this draft.
Oh, that's gonna muddy things up even more. I mean, geez, I've lost track. I almost have to count again. What is it? 8 guys if it's Martavis Bryant that comes back. They have 6. If you counted Wheaton or Bryant, could be the 7th and or 8th if both of those guys are back on here. And then this is a big surprise to a lot of people, but Jesse James caught the next most balls, 39. He was targeted 60 times to Eli Rogers' 66. Now, Jesse James doesn't get a lot of that yards after, the catch. 338. He had 3 TDs. He played the next most snaps. Okay, if you take the offensive lineman completely out of the equation, okay, offensive linemen play most of the game. I think for the Steelers linemen, Jesse James actually played more than somebody. I want to say like maybe Ramon Foster, who had a little bit of injury trouble, was replaced by B.J. Finney. But besides linemen, besides Big Ben, besides AB, Jesse James had the most playing time of anyone on that offense last year. And they weren't expecting this because another number 2 guy, I'm not saying Jesse James is a number 2 guy. He shouldn't have been in this role. Can you imagine if Ladarius Green was out there starting 13 games, playing 16 of these games like Jesse James is? I mean, this is a guy that they also expected to help stretch the field that wasn't out there. So maybe this is another number 2 that we're not considering at this point.
Yeah, and there's no question about that. I mean, I'm the more time that goes by and nobody says Ladarius Green is completely cleared, because I haven't heard that. Now maybe he has been, but I haven't heard that he's been cleared. Even though it's off season, you'll hear guys are ready to practice if they want to, and I haven't heard that about him. And the more time that goes by, the more concerning that becomes. But I certainly am still a cup half full guy, and I'm hoping that we got Ladarius for a full year next year because he's under contract. He's not like he's going anywhere. Unless he retires, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and they did this contract kind of smart, too, in case he didn't end up working out. So we're already kind of almost underneath that, I think, year 2. And then after that, year 3 and 4 is like nothing. They could get rid of him, and then that's it. So if he doesn't end up playing, he did say that he was looking to come back for this year. So it's not like – I don't think he's contemplating retirement unless the doctors tell him he can't play. And we saw that happen. I was talking with a friend. I'm going to be breaking down some of these. I've already started some of the off-season like opponents within the division, and the Baltimore Ravens are in a world of hurt because you saw what happened with Zach Orr. They find this kid. He's a tremendous linebacker, and he has to retire because of some type of spinal condition. It's just a sad story. So sometimes it's just it's out of your control. This might be out of Ladarius's control. Even so, there's still a guy. There's another third rounder. Marcus Wheaton was a third round guy. Martavis was a fourth round guy. You think we're going to draft somebody in the mid rounds? You had a very good, in-depth, detailed, lengthy article, or more than one, on these wide receivers coming up in the draft that you could look at over at our website. But Sammy, everybody just kind of crapped on the guy because you know what? They weren't 5 games into this season. And the 5th game, of course, being the one where he injured his hand, dropped a few balls. People were wondering, but it was still a career game for him. He had 5 straight games of a catch of 40 or more yards. And that was only like second in franchise history. I think that Mike Wallace, did it 7 straight games. So when you think of adding Mike Wallace to this roster, the old Mike Wallace, like the 2011, 2012 Mike Wallace, well, maybe 2011 Mike Wallace, you're looking at Sammy Coates doing like here, he didn't have a whole. He had 2 catches in the opener, 2 for 56, 2 for 97 against the Bengals. Targeted 5 times. That was a slop fest. You're not going to say he dropped the ball, and everybody was dropping the ball. That game sucked. The weather was awful. The Philadelphia game, everybody was awful, but he still got a long ball in that one too. Kansas City Chiefs, he caught 6 of 8 for 79, and then he went off against the Jets, 6 of 11 for 139 and 2 touchdowns. And one of those was a long bomb, and then he just disappeared. He wasn't targeted like the entire season. He only had 2 catches the remainder of the regular season because he was hurt.
Yep. It's funny. Ed Boucher tweeted out, I think during that Jets game, Martavis who? Because of how Sammy was playing. But the downside of that is, again, and I spoke to you about this offline. At the Combine, a couple of the Steelers reporters were now who have seen his hands and have noted the fact that he hasn't had surgery on his hands yet and isn't currently planning to do so, said if those fingers are the way they are right now, there's a chance that he's not even here.
That's very possible. And I had asked, would they trade him or could they trade him? And your exact comment was, well, not if his hands are like that. So, I
hope nothing for the best for Sammy. I like Sammy. I've met him a couple times. He's a really nice guy. So at different events, my daughter thinks he's really cool. So I like him, and I hope that it all works out and that he stays because I think he has potential to be productive and contributing and a threat. But if his fingers are going the wrong directions, it's hard to catch a ball.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And then just rounding out the list, there's Kobe Hamilton. He mostly to me, he's just a third down guy. I find him on third down. He's never a hot read. He's like maybe the 3rd or 4th or 5th option, depending on how many guys are going out for a pass. He finds a way to get open. Ben finds him. He's been steady enough to catch the ball. It seems like his only other type of what do you want to say, celebrity to him is they try the back shoulder fade because he has a little bit of size to him. And sometimes he gets it, sometimes he doesn't. He's drawn pass interference calls that actually – the most famous, maybe the first famous one was in the preseason. They're working out Kobe Hamilton, one of those corner fade routes. Landry Jones throws the ball up to him. He can't high point it. He pops it up, and it gets picked off. And, of course, Landry Jones gets all the grief for it. Kobe Hamilton does not. 2 weeks later in the preseason, because I had to endure, I actually watched these games to do some of the recaps that we've been doing week to week on every game in the season. The Panthers game where nobody of any substance played, Kobe had actually drawn a pass interference call that was almost very similar to the no call in the AFC Championship game on that fourth down when Ben tried to go for him. But Ben had found him too. Ben found him in Miami for the touchdown there. Same play, just going to a different side of the field. And then at the same respect, Landry Jones had the overtime game winner where Kobe Hamilton caught it. So hot and cold, 6'2", 212. He was about the biggest guy they had left because they were running on a skeleton crew at the end of the season.
Yeah, every time I talk about Kobe Hamilton, what comes to mind is he's a poor man's Jericho Cotchery.
Jericho Cotchery just got a job with the Panthers too. Looks like he's going to be the wide receiver coach. So kudos to him. We liked Jericho when he was here because he caught a lot of touchdowns. But yeah,
same kind of guy, right? And something just happened that I got to bring up because it will impact the draft. John Ross just ran a 4.22 40.
Wow.
And while he's going through an injury.
Yeah. I don't think that's going to raise any eyebrows, Brian. What are you talking about?
It beats Chris Johnson's. I mean, it's crazy. Then the thing is, John Ross was a guy who might have fallen down to us. Forget it now. He's not going to be there.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of people, a lot of interested suitors for him, unless, like you said, you hope there's like a run on a certain position and maybe someone falls into that category. But we would like to have everybody that's projected in like the top, first 2 rounds or whatever. We would like every one of these players. It's just not going to happen. And we'll be talking about that. But one guy we did take last year, we took DeMarcus Ayers. He was supposed to be a special teams guy. He never even played like special teams. He showed a little bit of flashes at the end of the season there. He came in against the Ravens, had I think it was Tavon Young who yanked his jersey. Ben went to hit him downfield. He had a little wiggle. He looked a lot like AB in that Browns game. And I want to say he got in, I think, in the Dolphins postseason game too, and then just disappeared for the final 2 playoff games. But he did. He had like some Tony toe tap going on the sidelines. He had one work. He had one where I think it was reviewed and it came back. He's definitely got the hands. He's got the wiggle. He could get separation. He's deceptively fast. It's like you're just talking about Ross there running, in a straight line. We're talking about the vertical threat, meaning just downhill, man. Just go as fast as you can in a straight line, and can you beat the other guy that way? That's Mike Wallace. That's Darius Hayward-Bay. Should be Sammy Coates if he could hold on to the football. Martavis Bryant, obviously capable of doing the same. But then you got these other guys like Eli Rogers and Ayers, and of course AB, the very best at doing that. And these guys are going to learn from the best, obviously. So there might be some upside with Ayers, though. Statistics aren't going to really support. He had 6 catches, 53 yards, touchdown. Mostly that was with everybody sitting in that final game of the regular season where, Ben, Bell, Brown, Pouncey, everybody just sat on the bench.
Right. I think, to tie certain things up, it really boils down to this. We said this, I think, last time around, that some Steelers fans have this miraculous belief that the jersey, the colors themselves have magical properties and will take any free agent that is released from any team and suddenly turn them into the greatest player ever to play. And that's just not the case. And not everyone fits with us. But the bottom line with receivers is if you're going to go to war with AB, Martavis, Wheaton, and Eli Rogers as your 4 receivers with, say, Kobe Hamilton and DHB as extra 2 guys, how do you feel about that? Well, I'd feel great about that. But if you're going to go to war with AB and DHB and Kobe Hamilton and Eli Rogers and DeMarcus Ayers and maybe somebody else because you don't know about Sammy and I left Sammy off that first list and you don't know about Sammy and you don't know about Martavis, I don't feel as good. And I think that's the truth about the Steelers. And the reason I think they'll draft a wide receiver somewhere in this draft is because they have questions. And I don't know how confident they are in Sammy's hands, nor do I know how confident they are that Martavis can stay clean.
Yeah, I think that's the whole reason they took Sammy to begin with. So
yeah, absolutely.
And I had this conversation with Ron Lippock just in a previous episode. We were talking about, the Steelers use free agency to set up the draft, but I think they have enough already in play where I don't know that there's somebody they want to go out and get like a Lance Moore who could just be a dud versus a stud that they seemingly find all the time when they're working in the mid to late rounds. So
and they'll be there. They'll be there.
They will. And you have certainly detailed that over at Steel City Underground. Take a look at the website and find out. So, Brian, hey, man, always good having you on the show.
It's always a pleasure to be here. I enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, you know what, man? You sure you're not my goose?
I'm happy to be your goose as long as I don't die.
I can't make any promises on that, of course, but we'll hope for the best. And on that note, I hope for the best for our listeners too, because you know what? I always you mentioned dying, and now I have to close the show with be safe, be good. And I mean that. Be safe. Don't do anything stupid out there. Don't do anything that me or Brian would do. We'll catch you folks later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.